moves in. Okay. So welcome, comadres and friends. Happy New Year. I am Maria Ferrer, project manager of Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club. The book club leadership team and I are pleased to have you join us tonight for our teleconference as we celebrate our book club's quinceañero. Yes, our book club is 15 years old this year. It has been a privilege to support Latino authors throughout these many years, and we look forward to the next 15. We'd also like to extend a warm welcome to readers following us on our Twitter live chat. Tonight, please help us welcome authors María Garcia Esperon and Maceo Montoya. Their interviews will start shortly. Before we start, some housekeeping notes. Please keep yourselves on mute. You can keep your videos on if you prefer. We suggest that you put yourselves on speaker mode so that you can see the speaker and our authors tonight, but the gallery view works as well. So whichever one is more comfortable for you. If you have any questions, any comments for the authors, please put them in the chat. We will be monitoring the chat and we will add them to our list, and hopefully we can get to them tonight. But first, let's start with a little bit of our book club's history. Comadre Tess.
Hi, bienvenidos a todos. Our first book club gathering was in July 2004 in New York in Comadre Maria Ferrer's apartment. After a hiatus, Nora Comstock re-envisioned and relaunched the book club nationwide to promote the work of Latino authors to every book lover, to bring our community to bookstores, and to support our writers. We started our teleconferences in October of 2006. We are in our 15th year of sharing works by Latino authors with all of you. We created the teleconferences and book club to entice everyone to read more Latino authors, to learn about Latino roots and the different perspectives on Latino culture and heritage. Our book club and teleconferences are open to all, not just Latinos. We are creating a space for everyone to explore the Latino writer's mind and soul as portrayed through the written word. We encourage you to join our local book club in your city or time zone. We have clubs in 12 cities that are meeting virtually. There's sure to be one that can fit your schedule. If your city doesn't have one, why not help us start one? For more information about our book club, visit our website, latinolit.com. So please invite others to join us. Comadre Karen?
Welcome, comadres and friends, to our January 2022 Zoom teleconference. I'm Karen Gonzalez, Assistant Coordinator for the Las Comadres and Friends Book Club, Denver Comadres Book Club Facilitator, and co-founder of the Colorado Alliance of Latino Mentors and Authors, CALMA. Thank you for joining us tonight. We will begin with our interview of author Maria Garcia Esperon. Maria was born in Mexico City and has won many awards, including the Hispanic American Poetry Award for Children. Her novel, Dito for Anías, was selected in 2016 on the IBBY honor list. Tonight we are discussing Maria's new book, The Sea Ring World, Sacred Stories of the Americas, illustrated by Amanda Mijangos and translated by David Bowles. Interviewing Maria will be Shirley Yanes. She is a Guatemalan New Yorker, content creator, co-host of Geekettes Chat, a book and movie review channel on YouTube. Shirley and her sister Christy enjoy reading books, manga, watching movies, anime, and singing their hearts out at karaoke. They were a producer for the Latino Film Market Film Festival. They love supporting independent content creators, authors, and film projects. Comadre Shirley, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. This is my first time interviewing a published author, so I'm excited. Thank you, Comadres. Thank you, Maria. Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for just making this book in collections of stories. It was amazing. And yeah, so let's get into it, Maria. How is your day today?
It's very exciting because of this meeting. Hi, every comadre in this wonderful meeting. And this book is full of magic. Every day brings a very good news. And I am waiting for your questions.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, because I've learned so much, and you definitely don't hear a lot of these stories from indigenous cultures and people. So thank you. I learned a lot. So first question is, for those readers who are just learning about your book, please give us a brief synopsis.
A brief what?
Brief synopsis, sorry, like the plot.
Okay, resume. Well, the resume is, it is my second book from a series around the myths of the world. The first is about Greek and Roman, which I am very fond. And the second, I wrote it in 2017, where was a big earthquake in Mexico. A big one, a big earthquake that happened in the same day a big earthquake had happened 30 years ago or so. So then I thought, I have to write about the gods of hurricanes, earthquakes, the very core of America. This is the resume. So I began to investigate Quetzalcoatl, Huracan, etc. And I felt the need to write all America. Like if I was a bird, a big bird that was flying through the map of America, and from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, try to see some important stories among billions of stories that are our America. So you will find stories of what is called Native America, and then Mexico. I am expert in Mexico. I'm not expert in Native America. I discovered, and I was astonished discovering these rich cultures, and also South America. I have been many times in Colombia because I write books for children and youth there. So I know the myths closely, the myths of Colombia and the people of Colombia. So I tried to make this puzzle, and the rest was all the magic of Levine Querido, the translator, David Bowles, and of course, the illustrations of Amanda Mijancos.
Thank you. And now, when I was reading each collection, I was like researching because I just wanted to research. I was like, oh wait, this mountain is called this because it's based on this story. It was just so fascinating. So yeah, definitely. So next question, the Sea Ring World, Scare Stories of America is such an amazing collection of myths and folklore. What inspired you to write this book? I mean, you kind of, but you know, if you want to go into more detail.
Well, the need of give voice of these stories, for example, in Mexico, have been worked by archaeologists and anthropologists, not by authors. You know, Greek and Roman, which I started, have a long tradition of poets, writers, paintings, okay? And our America is very young, okay? So have been the anthropologists and the archaeologists which have discovered through the paintings, through the fragments, through everything, an amazing world that cannot disappear. So I felt the necessity, the need to give voice to these stories. And I think that have fascinated me since I was a little girl. I was born in Mexico City. You know, this is the Aztec calendar, okay?
Oh, that's so cool.
This is wonderful. This is absolutely wonderful. This is a big stone in the Mexican Anthropology Museum. And I wrote a story in 2010 about the daughter of the great Emperor Moctezuma. And it was called Copo de Algodón, cotton ball. That was the name of the girl. And I followed the signos of the Aztec calendar. These are 20 signs of the day. So stories like this that anthropologists tell us, archaeologists tell us, you see in the museum, have not a great tradition because we are young of literature tradition. So the past of Mexico, in the first place, because I am Mexican, inspired me to write this book and to make it match with the stories of Greece and Rome, to have a whole mythical world to the readers, young readers.
That's really cool. Thank you. Next question. So growing up in Guatemala, my mother grew up with the La Llorona story. So, you know, just to keep kids to behave and all that stuff. So they always told her that story, and then she told us. So where did you find these stories, or who were your sources, or who did you contact for your
Llorona, Llorona, Llorona. This is a complex story, a story made of fragments, a story that comes back to the root of humankind, the root of femininity, and a very important goddess of the ancient Mexicans, who was Cihuacoatl, the goddess snake. Okay, this goddess snake has a particular role in the creation myth. She makes people from the bones, the precious bones of the dead, okay? But then it changes and it turns to be like a phantom, a ghost that cries, "Oh, my children." It's a lament, it's a lamento, it's a pain, see? And this was a prophecy when the Spanish came to Mexico. The Cihuacoatl appeared like a phantom in the streets of the old Mexico, in that old Tenochtitlan that had the streets of water and was a jewel and had these temples, everything. And then when they began the colonial times, the Spanish and the Mexican, the story became mixed. It's a woman that is abandoned by a Spanish man. That this happened in all America, in Mexico, in Peru, that the conquerors loved native women, and the king said, "You divorce you leave your native woman, your wife, and you marry a Spanish." Because in the first moment they wanted to mix. In the second, by a plan that was far from them, was that. So they abandoned the children and wife, and the Llorona is the epitome of this. Is this woman that is also a goddess, is a creation goddess, is a phantom that cries, and she goes with the times, okay? And there is a song in Oaxaca called La Llorona. Ay de mi Llorona, Llorona, Llorona de azul celeste. Aunque la vida me cueste, Llorona, no dejaré de quererte. So Llorona is universe. And also I was talking to you about the Greek myths. This is Lamia, a woman, but she's damned by Hera, because Zeus loved her, and she lost her children, and she cries, and she cries in the wild or something. No, so it is the same. It's a pain. And also in Mexico, you know, these terrible things that mothers that lose their children because the narco things or criminal things, and they make societies, and they go to look for their loved ones that are lost, and they are looking for their bones. So we come to the root of Llorona, the root of Cihuacoatl, from the precious bones, the tears, and the pain. We all together, my dear comadres and friends, from all our beautiful America, we are intended to build the new mankind. And this is what this book is. It's a llamado, a call to us to build mankind. And there is a powerful myth here from the Popol Vuh, the sacred roof, Guatemala, of the Maya Quiches. They are talking about the end of one way of being mankind and the beginning of another. And that's what is happening to us with this pandemic. All the mankind faces the same problem, and we are born again. We are in a creative moment of this cycle. This is called the fifth sun, el quinto sol. But it ended with the earthquakes, the movement, the hurricanes, the pandemic. Now we are beginning the sixth sun in the thought of ancient Mexicans, ancient Americans. La Llorona.
Thank you. I actually have a question from Tess. She says that there must have been many stories that you could not include in the book. What incentive did you use to choose them?
That was hard. That was an intuitive, and because in the first version of the book is a dictionary coming with A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So looking for the letters, I was collecting the stories. I knew that the Popol Vuh must be there because this is the book of the creation and a very important story, the twins that defeat the powers of death. They go to the underworld and they become the sun and the moon by defeating the powers of the underworld. So this was a core, okay? The Popol Vuh must be. Then I began to put the letters. I began with the spider, mother spider, that is North America, because the spider is everywhere. And in Teotihuacan, which is the big city of wonderful city of the pyramids, you know, I expect you visit there. If you haven't visited Teotihuacan, you must go to Teotihuacan because it is incredible. And there is a painting about the paradise of Tlaloc, which Tlaloc is not Tlaloc, it's a comadre, it's Chalchotlicue. Okay, it's a woman. And in the tree, that is that spider. Okay, so the spider, she's woman. The spider is comadre. A spider tells a story. A spider makes the universe all together with a web. And you told you began in the web, no? In the World Wide Web. So this is the spider that make us be connected, and that is so sensitive with her web that we can feel our thoughts. And that's what I was choosing the stories and based in my life. For example, talking about the Lake Michigan, las dunas, how you say dunas? The sand, big mountains of sand. Once I was invited to Michigan because my book, Copo de Algodón, it was magic. And then I could see Lake Michigan and that lonely landscape full of sand. And so I choose a story from there. So following my life and following the letters of the alphabet and very important things, I was convinced they must be there.
Thank you. Do you have a favorite story in the book?
Yes, of course. The legend of the volcanoes. In Mexico, you know, in Mexico City, before all the smog and all those things, you can see the volcanoes. One has the shape of a beautiful woman sleeping. When the snow is her, and all the shape of this woman, which is called Mujer Blanca, is Taxihuatl in Nahuatl, white woman. And aside her, the warrior Popocatépetl, the mountain that puts a smoke, which is a warrior, and the legend is that she was a princess, Aztec princess. Their love was forbidden for something, and she dies, and the Popocatépetl took her loved one to the summit, to the hill, and then the snow covers her, and he always is smoking, looking for her with their eternal love. And I always, since I was a girl in Mexico City and I wanted to see the volcanoes, I couldn't because of smoke. But some days in February, when the wind is close, you see that wonderful image, and you are full of astonishment and awe, and you really understand that it is human, and she's a princess and she's a warrior, and their love will last forever. And then for the book, my editor in Spanish wanted more text. So I developed a feature to this princess, and I made her a poet. Aztec poetry was wonderful. It is wonderful because it is so contemporary. There were women poets, few, but they were. So I want to put in my version of the legend, which is a romantic legend. It's not Aztec origin. It's something romantic from the 19th century, I think, or something like that. I choose to make her a poet, an admirer of the poet of King Nezahualcóyotl, and also to make an homage to the Nahuatl language, which happens to be that our translator is expert, David. David is expert in Nahuatl. He's great. So this is a meeting incredible, full of magic. So that's my story preferida.
I actually want to say that's the story I love. That was the one I researched too. Because I was like, oh wait, is this true? And I had to research it.
It's true.
I loved
Of
it.
course it's true.
So one last question. What are you working on now?
Well, that's a wonderful thing that is related with Austin. Well, I wrote a book last year called Sexto Sol, telling what is not being told. The story of Aztec mythology since the very beginning, since for example, the creation, for saying something, to the foundation of Tenochtitlan. This was amazing for me because I wrote it in the pandemic. I wrote it when I was losing my loved ones. My mother died, my husband from COVID, and other things. So I could swim in the mystery, in the beauty of Aztec myths, and collect so truths beautiful that are, for example, no, not for example, this is the truth. In Aztec knowledge, first death and then life. Wow. So to die is to wake up. First comes death and then comes life. So when our loved one dies, it is because true life is going to happen. And when we will die, it's not correct that we die because we will wake up in a place called Tamuanchan, which is the paradise. Then my friend of Austin, Cindy Symington, she is 70. She could be a perfect comadre. I will tell her. She loves Mexico from many time ago, and she suffered the lose, the pérdida, of her son, 40 years in Austin. So I was finishing my book, and I told her, and we began the translation of this, looking for the sense of death from my husband, my mother, her son. And my husband and her son died in the same month. My husband was 70, her son was 40. Both from my husband from COVID, her son consequences of COVID because his restaurant, the Cenote, wasn't working with many problems, and he was depressed and was very sad. Okay, so looking for the sense of losing meaning of life or losing our death, we began to walk hand with hand, English and Spanish, through the core of these myths. And really, this book is a continuation of this one. And I think this is the moment to the stories of our ancestors, American ancestors, to be heard, because it's when we need them, because we suffer, we lose, but really we have to understand that we are going to a superior level of life. So we have a subtitle, because when you study Aztec mythology, you arrive to the concept great of the only God, which name is Ipalnemo Guani, the one who invents himself, the Lord of togetherness. And we thought in a subtitle, the mind of God. And then we find the mind of God in ourselves. There is a concept also in Aztec, el interior del cielo, the interior of heaven. The interior of heaven is in ourselves. In the pyramids, in the Aztec pyramids, they are in the earth, but they contain the interior of heaven. That's why in the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl, they found that the wall was mixed with a material called in Spanish, pirita, the gold of the fool, because when they came in with the antorcha, with the torch, the heaven is within the pyramid. Heaven is within us. God is within us. The power of regeneration, creation is within us. And what I told you in the first place, first death, then life. That is the project now. with Cindy Simon from us. Thank you, dear. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for inviting me, because I find a lot of sense. I find a lot of joy. I find that we are together forging something superior in mankind. And it is something that has to be first with love.
Definitely.
Love and life.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for this book. I mean, I learned so much, stories that you wouldn't hear about if you didn't grow up in these cultures, or they don't learn.
We're proud for being these ancestors, to have this root, and it's all America. It's not Mexico. It's America.
Yeah.
Aztecs came from North America.
Exactly, and you won't hear it in schools. So that's what's so great, to have this available.
The same root. Michigan is related with Nahuatl. It means place of fish. Michin, fish in Nahuatl. Can, place. In Mexico, there is a state called Michoacán, the place of, and this is a state who has these great lakes.
Yeah.
Lake Pátzcuaro, Sirawen. So we're one. and really, America is for everybody. It's our America. There are no barreras. There are no frontiers, because we have the same root. So that is.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, comadres.
Comadres dear, comadritas bonitas. Muchas gracias.
Yeah. So that's the end of my interview. Thank you.
Okay. Our second interview tonight is with Maceo Montoya, an award-winning author, artist, and educator who has published books in a variety of genres. His first book, The Scoundrel and the Optimist, was awarded the 2011 International Latino Book Award for Best First Book. Maceo's paintings, drawings, and prints have been featured in numerous publications in the US and internationally. Maceo comes from a family of artists, including his father, Malaquias Montoya, a renowned artist, activist, and educator, and his late brother, the poet Andres Montoya. Interviewing him will be Comadre Laura Esparza. She is the manager for the Division of Museums and Cultural Programs for the City of Austin's Parks and Recreation Department. She also founded the Austin Historic Museum Alliance, established the first affiliation with the Smithsonian Institution with the Parks Department, and chairs the creative economy portion of Austin's 30-year comprehensive plan. In 2021, Laura was named to the advisory board of Historic Artists, Homes and Studios, a program of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Comadre Laura, take it away.
Thank you, Karen, and welcome, Maceo. It's such an honor to meet you and to interview you tonight. Can you begin? Let's begin with a short synopsis of your novel.
Yeah, well, thank you all to Las Comadres for inviting me to be a part of this book club. And you create these works in isolation, or often in isolation, and you just hope that they find the readership. And but for Latinx, Chicanx authors, it can be difficult for their works to make it out in the world. And so book clubs like this are so inspiring and so necessary for our stories to be shared. So just a brief synopsis of preparatory notes for future masterpieces. It's about a young artist growing up in a mountain village in New Mexico in the 1940s. And the title comes from his desire to make these masterpieces. And yet he's never able to get beyond the preparatory stage. He's always writing notes with the plan that someday, when he finds the time and the right space, the right circumstances, he's going to make his great works. The problem being is that he never finds the right place, the right circumstances, because he's misunderstood, because he's expected to take care of his family, to get a job, to do all these things that society expects of us, right? But that for artists can be so difficult, but especially for an artist who is Mexican American growing up in the 1940s and 50s. And so he's an outsider when it comes to US society. He's an outsider when it comes to his community. He's an outsider when it comes even to his own family. There's a moment in the beginning where his mom thinks about actually having him committed to an asylum, because he struggles with madness. And I think the question is always whether it's actual, is he actually struggling with madness, or is it just a society that doesn't understand his particular and very singular view of the world. So the story follows his adventures and misadventures for almost 40 years. And in that time, he runs into these kind of great figures from Chicano history. And I picked these figures because they also kind of struggled with madness, or they had their own demons that challenged them. And it includes Reyes Lopez Tijerina, Oscar Zeta Costa, the outsider artist Martin Ramirez, and these kinds of figures who he runs into that really kind of challenge his view of the world, or continue to challenge his view of the world.
Thank you. It was that and so much more. Because there was a complexity to the book when you introduced the voices of three other people who discover this manuscript. The nephew who inherited it, basically from the nursing home that, dumped off his stuff, the narrator's stuff, and then his friend, who is a young feminist who's just graduated from Chicano Studies, undergraduate school, and then her professor, who she shares the manuscript with, who writes a subtext all the way through, a sort of a meta text. And so it's these three meta texts that lend this, dimension and complexity to the story. But at first, a couple of short little questions. As if the narrator were an outsider, is that why he goes unnamed in the story?
That's a great question. I think that that's part of it, right? But I think a lot of it was like he is so focused on himself. His story is the most important story, to the exclusion of everyone else. And there's times where he can be viewed as being, an egotist or selfish, or not taking into consideration other people's circumstances, including, one of his closest friends, Enrique. And because of that, he never thinks to, let me introduce myself. It's more about what's right there immediately in front of him. But I was also borrowing from other traditions. And I think that I was looking at Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man as one great example of a narrator that goes unnamed. And I think part of that is, whenever you name someone, it kind of creates a little bit of a distance between the reader and the storyteller. And in this case, you can kind of always place yourself through the point of view of the narrator, because he goes unnamed.
Yeah. Every time something like that comes up, like the Invisible Man, another metaphor for a Chicano artist appears, and it just tears my heart. It just rips my heart out. One of our Austin comadres asked, how did the format of writing the meta text in this novel evolve in your writing?
Yeah, no, so I wrote the first draft of this novel almost 10 years ago, and I revised it, and and it was just the story of the artist, and I would send it out, and I would get rejections, and I really believe in the process of getting rejected as an and I see it as an opportunity to spend more time in the world of your characters. And in this case, because it was about an artist, I always wondered what his drawings looked like. And so at some point, this is 5-6 years after I had written that initial draft, I decided, you know what, I'm going to start illustrating this story, and not my own illustrations as Maceo Montoya, but as the unnamed narrator. What would his drawings look like? And so a lot of the drawings pulled text from his memoir, and I typed those up, and I was cutting them, and I was cutting and pasting, and I felt like I had this like laboratory. And when I was creating them, I felt like, again, I was the narrator of this story, someone else's hand creating these drawings, the character's hand. And once I did that, I felt like I have these illustrations and I have the memoir. It became an object. And it's like, well, who is this object for? How is this object to be found? And then that's what led me to thinking about, well, when he passes on, it would end up in his family's hands. And in this case, his nephew, Ernie Lobato, and he became a character. He's an accountant and doesn't quite know what to do with this story. He's very straight-laced. He is, somewhat familiar with his uncle's story, but it's not until he shares it with his friend, Lorraine Rios, who's kind of an expert in Chicanx history, that she sees the value. And then, wanting to do something with it, this person who has run into all these luminaries from Chicano history, she decides to send it to Professor Pizarro. And I guess in analyzing my decision to have this meta text, because of all that time, 10 years from the time of my first writing to it being published, there's a lot of just conversations that I'm having. In those 10 years, I also started teaching in the Chicanx Studies Department at UC Davis. I'm having these conversations about Chicano literature and Latinx literature with my students, about not only the content of Chicano literature, but also how it's received and who determines what's read and what's taught and what's published. And because I was having those conversations, I saw them as being embedded in this story and wanted to find a way of including those thoughts. And so I feel like if the main narrative, which was other than just editing and polishing, if it had remained the same as 6, 7, 8 years ago, it'd be a very different story. But that time allowed me to kind of think about it and introduce these extra elements.
Wonderful, wonderful. So rejection really does have a purpose.
Absolutely. It hurts, but I think that it definitely it becomes part of the generative process.
Yeah, and really deepens the story, I think, because it had a profound impact on me. So I mentioned to you earlier that I met your dad, Malaquias Montoya, and his brother, Jose, when they exhibited, one of the rare times that they exhibited together. And I remember that both of them in different ways incorporated text into their paintings. This was part of your artistic cultural heritage, to see text and visual art together. What do you draw? What else do you draw from your heritage, from your family's background, for this novel?
That's a wonderful question. And, I had always thought of my uncle's influence, right, as both a visual artist and a poet, and then also a musician, and moving between these mediums. And my father is a wonderful storyteller, and he's never written his stories down, but to know him is to know that he loves telling stories, and very humorous stories, but in a way that was always been separate from his art practice, which was murals and posters. And even though I saw stories in there, I didn't necessarily make the connection with the text, but there definitely is text in every mural and every poster. Often he'll include a quote from a poet, sometimes his own language. And I think my dad's philosophy was always like, I have a message that I want to share, to convey to my audience. And if my images aren't clear, then I'm going to find a way of creating more context and creating other layers so that I know that the viewer or the audience will come away with the message that I'm intending. He never shied away from that. And in some ways, I think about my footnotes to this story as being, I don't want the reader to kind of leave the story that I'm trying to tell without this larger kind of contextual story that I'm also trying to convey. But I think that there's a lot of, throughout Chicanx art, there's a lot of examples of artists moving between mediums. And I always felt like it came out of necessity, right? There are these stories that are so important to tell. And that, you have this gift, or you have these gifts as a storyteller. And that's the most important thing, that these stories are heard, that they're not ignored, that they're not, overlooked by the larger society, that they're that important that you'll reach for whatever you can in order to be able to share these narratives. And so you see a lot of examples of wearing multiple hats, right? And I think it emerged out of the Chicano movement, where a lot of artists felt like it wasn't, you couldn't just be an artist, you also had to be an artist and an activist. You couldn't just be a poet, but you also had to be a poet and a teacher and a community organizer. And my dad tells a lot of stories of some of his activism that had nothing to do with his art, but had to do with him using his hands and using his abilities as a craftsman, right? So it left just working on a poster or a mural and entered into, he would build benches or he would build stuff for different organizations. So I grew up with that, where you take what gifts that you have and you use them in whatever way that you can. And for me, it's kind of been distilled into, my art is first and foremost. It's what I want to spend all day doing. I know how long it takes to write a novel. I know how long it takes to come up with a series of paintings. But it's wonderful to be able to move between these different mediums and to experiment with how they work together in order to tell these stories that I feel are important and aren't often heard. There's also, I have another uncle, Malaquias and Jose is their brother, their eldest brother, my Uncle Jimmy. And even though he was, he sang and he played the guitar, he didn't become a well-known artist like his brothers, and he struggled with schizophrenia. And my dad and I used to go and travel to bring him cigarettes or bring him t-shirts or bring him sodas, like all these kind of just very specific things that he would ask for. And when we would travel to the rest home where he lived, we would try and have these conversations with him, but it was almost impossible to tap into what he was thinking. You didn't have access to his stories in the same way that you had access to my Tio Jose's stories or my dad's stories. And so he was always an enigma. I always wanted to know more about him. And when he passed away, he left behind just a Spanish-English dictionary, a magnifying glass, and all of his cigarettes and to me, it was like so sad that entire life lived, and that was all that remained of his story. And in a way, this character of mine who struggles with madness, right? I wanted to find a way of exploring my uncle's story, even though it became something, that's what's so wonderful about being a fiction writer, is you can take a nugget like that and really run with it in the directions that it takes you. But it was that desire to hear someone like my uncle's story finally being put to the permanence of the page.
And that's a beautiful tribute to your uncle. And I can't wait to read the book that you might write about your father. That will be definitely one that I'll be first to buy. So meeting all of your father's and your uncle's friends over the years, their colleagues and their friends, perhaps brought you to including the story of Reyes Lopez Tijerina and Oscar Zeta Costa. From our Denver group, they ask, did you have to get permission from their families to write about them?
No, I didn't get permission, and I, just I turned them into characters, and these are public figures. They're renowned figures, and so I was able to take enough details of the stories of their life, but to use these kind of entries into unknown aspects of their story. So when Reyes Lopez Tijerina was a young preacher in his 20s, before he became a land grant activist in New Mexico, who knows what his life was like when he was on the road and he was preaching, and so this allowed kind of an entry to fictionalize his story. And the same thing with Oscar Zeta Acosta, taking aspects of his life. It's a mystery. No one knows to this day how he disappeared, what happened to him. All is known is that he was last seen in Mazatlan in 1974, if I'm recalling correctly. And yet the legends grew about, where he ended up or the circumstances of his death. And so in that gap, it allowed me to kind of reimagine or imagine what happened in those periods. And so I think that, looking for these moments of stories that aren't known, that aren't told, gave me the opportunity to then be able to fictionalize their lives.
Yeah. In the same way, I've been fictionalizing what I can project onto the life of the narrator. Do you think that he was poised to become one of the first Chicano graphic novelists that never got his chance?
That's a great question. In my own journey as an artist and a writer, even though I come from a family of artists, like and had their support, I know how essential it was for me that along the way there was these interventions where I had mentors or teachers or fellow writers or artists who they gave me the shot in the arm that I needed to continue. I don't think it's easy to be an artist. You take your heart and you put it out there, and that's just like the actual the experience of telling these stories that are so important to you, but it doesn't pay. It's like how do you kind of make do with like the practical aspects of life, and so it's almost easier not to be an artist, even though it goes against the grain of who you are. And so I had these people along the way who saw something in me or saw something in my work that said something that encouraged me to continue on. And I think that's what can be so sad about the narrator, is that over and over he's so misunderstood, or over and over he runs into these obstacles and he never quite gets that encouragement that I think every artist needs. Yeah. And so I don't really know, to be honest, like if he was destined to become the artist that he dreamed of being, except I know that he eventually found a way of telling his story, which is why we have the object of the drawings and the memoir. So the desire to tell his story in whatever way it emerged, that never went away until his dying day.
Yeah, this is true. And, another, thing that I wondered about was, I started to suspect that not only was, I wondered whether he was not just deluded, but maybe on a spectrum, and how some characters, some people in earlier years when we weren't talking about being on a spectrum were not very well understood. Maybe he was autistic rather than mad.
Yeah, that, it's a great question. And I don't think I necessarily, I considered like where in the spectrum of what were the actual mental health issues that he was
Mhm.
struggling with. I just think it was enough to have this kind of burning individuality, this burning desire to do something, and repeatedly running up against these obstacles. But also, I mean, we can all in a way understand the experience of viewing the world in a certain way and then meeting someone who views it in a completely different way, and how it's so difficult to have, you know, those different versions overlap, right? And that's not madness, right? That's just being human.
Right.
Yeah.
It was a very human story, and that's what I really loved about it.
Yeah.
You know, the interwoven narratives between the nephew and his friend, the girl, the young woman, and the professor, and this adds this complexity and diversity of perspectives from contemporary Chicanos. If anything, we see how different influences from everything from French art to feminism has impacted Chicano thought and identity. So what are your thoughts as an academic on what has happened to Chicano identity?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I see it evolving we're on the quarter system here at UC Davis. And so I see it evolving every single quarter. And when I teach an introduction to Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx culture class, and it's a 200 student course. And I start off with a definition of what Chicano means, but I say it's an open definition. And the reason why is, like, I don't want to be the arbiter of Chicanx identity, right? I also have seen how that identity has shifted and evolved and expanded over the course of 40 to 50 years, right? And then when you have a closed definition, right, it leaves people outside of that identity, and including the narrator of my novel, right? He did not fit within his community, and yet his story needs to be included, right? Those outsiders need to be a part of Chicanx identity, because what it does is expands it and opens it. And I see, you know, inclusion of an understanding of gender and sexuality, of looking at Chicanx culture as not just being about brownness, but also incorporating you know, the Black identity within Mexican history, not also viewing it just as about being Mexican or Mexican American, but others who have identified with the experience of Chicanismo. And so I see the fluidity of the identity as being essential to it continuing to live, right? It has to remain relevant in order for it to continue to be used.
Mhm.
And the moment that it's not, then it will be just, you know, something of the past. And I'm not ready for it to be in the past, right? I see my father and my uncle and what they tried to create, right? What they worked for, and how it contributed to their humanity and their understanding of themselves. And that wasn't very long ago, right? Like, I travel to Elmira, where I grew up, and I have conversations with my dad, and I want that legacy to be preserved. And one way of doing that is to understand that things evolve, and that we can continue to look at this complex issue, this complex identity in new and innovative ways.
One last short question.
Sure.
Which character is most like you in the book?
Oh, absolutely, the narrator.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maceo. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you, Laura.
Our thanks to authors María Garcia and Maceo Montoya, and their publishers, Querido, Levine, and University of Nevada Press, for their generous donation of books to our early registrants. Thank you as well to our interviewers, Shirley Yanez and Laura Esparza. We are so grateful for spending time with us this evening. We enjoyed the sharing of perspectives and insights from your work and your lives. We treasured the opportunity to learn about you, and we feel more connected to you. We also want to thank our audience for taking the time to join us tonight, and thank you for those that submitted questions. And we'd like to thank all of our volunteers without whom this book club and all the associated work, it wouldn't happen. Mil gracias to all of you. Please remember to support our authors by writing a review of their books on sites like Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, y muchas más. Those reviews carry weight with the publishers as well as with other readers. Buy books to support our authors. And if your library doesn't have one, ask them to order it. And please attend your local book club meetings and bring a friend or two. Remember, it's open to everyone, men and women, and not just Latinos. Our February books are Hades Argentina by Daniel Lodell and Spirits of the Ordinary by Kathleen Alcalá. Thank you all for your continued support of our book club and Latino literature. Please join us in celebrating our quinceañero throughout the year. Stay safe, wear your masks, good night, and always read Latino Lit.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.